Alright, everybody, I'm here to tell you about macromolecules. So, as we've been discussing in class, there are 4 different macromolecules. And again, these are things that you're eating. So, if you think of the main things of your diet, carbohydrates, lipids, which are fats, protein, and the one that's not really part of your diet, nucleic acids. It's in your DNA. So, we are going to start off with carbohydrates. And if you see this little molecule here, this is glucose, and that is what carbohydrates start with. So you always remember carbohydrates are really just sugar. So they are glucose, they're a source of short-term energy. You eat your candy bar, you get a short burst of energy. And they're also used as structural materials in different organisms. First one we start with is monosaccharide. Mono meaning one, saccharide meaning sugar, so one sugar. They're just a one simple ring. Examples of this are glucose and fructose. You will need to know the chemical formula of glucose, which is C6H12O6. The reason that's important is because we're going to be talking about a ratio. I don't know why this A subscripted, it should be a big A, but that is glucose or carbohydrates are always in a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. So 1 carbon to 2 hydrogen, 1 oxygen. The next part are disaccharides, so 2 sugars, which are really just 2 monosaccharides combined. Examples of this are sucrose, maltose, and lactose. Here is lactose, so yes, lactose is what's used in milk. So if you're lactose intolerant, you can't handle this disaccharide here. And remember, all sugars end in ose, so if you see that, you know that we're talking about a carbohydrate. Finally, the last one is polysaccharides. Poly means many, and so if you look at this, this is glycogen. This is found in all animals, but there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and so on and so forth. It's a huge molecule, which is why it's harder to break down. These are things like starch, so potatoes, a lot harder for your body to break down than something like glucose. There are long chains of repeating units of monosaccharides, so just a whole bunch of glucose put together, or glucose and fructose, and they store energy. So most of the carbohydrates, you do want to think of them as being quick energy, but these polysaccharides can store them. They're also used as structural, so cellulose, which is found in plants. How do we get these polymers? So hopefully in class when we built these, you were able to notice what you had to do is take out water. So you took out a hydrogen one side and an OH or a hydroxyl group from the other. When you went together, it formed, and that is called dehydration. So we did a whole bunch of dehydration reactions which removed water to form the polymer. So carbs and proteins both do this, and really lipids do too. The reverse of that is hydrolysis. And so what hydrolysis does is if we added water to this disaccharide, it would break apart the polymer and would add that water. The next one we're going to talk about is lipids. So lipids are these huge, what we call hydrocarbon chains. So hydro, hydrogen, and carbon, and they're just these really long chains of hydrogen and carbon. By the way, just going back, what molecules are in carbohydrate? What elements? If you look, all that's in here is carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. Remember glucose, C6H12O6. So CHO, those are the elements of carbohydrates. Going to lipid, we have carbon, hydrogen, and just a little bit of oxygen. So those lipids are nonpolar. So if you remember from the water video, nonpolar means it doesn't like water. It's not going to dissolve in water. And they store energy. That's their main part. And they're also really important in cell membranes. Think, if your cell membrane was made of water, and your body's mostly water, your cell membrane would dissolve in water then. That wouldn't be good. So you need oils, something fatty, to get that cell membrane so that you have a barrier between the outside of the cell, watery, and the inside of the cell, which is also watery. They are also known as hydrophobic. Again, basically the same thing as nonpolar, just means they don't like water. They're made up of, for every one carbon, two hydrogen, and like I said, just a little bit of oxygen. So again, CHO, but very little O. That's how you tell the difference between them and carbohydrates. There's a few different types. The first one is triglycerides. So tri means three, and the one that we built in class was a triglyceride. We had three fatty acid tails, and that's where the tri goes from. And so it's a three fatty acids bonded with a glycerol. So that is what we made. And this is basically all the fats that you talk about are triglycerides. Those get broken down into saturated versus unsaturated. So saturated has no double bonds and they're solid at room temperature. So S for solid. So these are things like butter and lard, bacon grease. So like if you ever have bacon grease and you let it cool, it turns into this really hard substance. Saturated fat. Unsaturated had double bonds. So again, remember, if you put your hand into a U, you have two bonds. So they have double bonds. They're liquid at room temperature, and this part they'd be kinked. If you imagine this, it's not just a flat substance like this. When you have that bond, oh, there it is. It actually kind of kinks up, and so that helps them to be liquid at room temperature. So oils, it's the biggest example. Another lipid is the phospholipid. So if you're thinking back to functional groups, this phospho part is the phosphate. And so you have a phosphate head and two fatty acid tails. And this is what your cell membrane is made out of. One end is really polar, so it likes water, and the tails are not. And so that's how we keep the water from dissolving the whole molecule. Steroids, so not the steroids that you would inject, but there's actually natural steroids in your body, which are cell messengers. They have four carbon rings, cholesterol. Examples of this are testosterone and estrogen. Those are also in the lipid category, and waxes, earwax, stuff like that. Also lipid. Alright, that is going to conclude our carbohydrates and lipids.